everybody. We are talking about the Silk Road today, which is one of the most famous trading routes throughout history. So let's take a dive in, shall we? So the Silk Road, as you can see, it's incredibly expansive. We have beginning in China, traveling along through Persia, up into Constantinople, and of course, during the height of the Roman Empire, we know Roman women loved silk, but we can also see different paths going down and actually connecting with Indian Ocean trade. Here's what we know, guys. The Silk Road was an overland trade route that linked China to the Mediterranean world through Mesopotamia, Iran, and Central Asia. And there were two periods of particularly heavy use in the Silk Road. And that would be 100 BCE through 907 CE, and then the 13th through the 17th centuries CE. And the origins of the Silk Road trade may have been located in the occasional trading of Central Asian nomads. Regular large-scale trade was fostered by the Chinese demand for Western products, especially horses, and by the Parthian state in northeastern Iran, and it's controlled the markets in Mesopotamia. And of course, as I said before, Roman women loved Chinese silk. In addition to horses, China imported alfalfa, grapes, and a variety of other new crops, as well as medicinal products, metals, and precious stones. China exported peaches and apricots, spices, and manufactured goods, including silk, pottery, and paper. The Silk Road was one of the safest places you could travel on. It was said people could carry a sack of gold on their back because steppe nomads known as the Scythians provided animal handlers, and protection along the Silk Road. Eventually, it would be the Mongols who provided this protection. Yes, those Mongols, and we'll talk about them next week. The Scythians were herders who transported lightweight dwelling products on ox-drawn wagons across the grasslands and deserts. So here's some regions just to take a look at. Knowing your geography is incredibly important, obviously in general, but also this class. So Turkic nomads who became the dominant pastoral group in Central Asia benefited from trade, and their elites constructed houses, lived settled lives, and became very interested, and then eventually conduits themselves, in foreign religions, including Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. Central Asian military technologies, especially the stirrup, were exported both east and west with significant consequences for the conduct of war. Y'all, when you can stand up on the galloping horse and then shoot your bow and arrow with deadly accuracy, that's kind of a game changer. The Han period in China was rich in intellectual developments. Scholar officials read and wrote in a range of genres in their free time. Sima Qian, who was the chief astrologer of Emperor Wu, could also be called the father of history in China. And he wrote an exhaustive history of China, beginning with the Yellow Emperor in the 3rd millennium BCE. Relative to technological innovations, the Han era saw the development of the watermill, a usable horse collar, paper, horse breeding to supply cavalry forces, and a reliable crossbow trigger. The Qin and Han also built thousands of miles of roads to facilitate army movement and a network of canals connecting northern and southern river systems. The Chinese believed in a number of nature spirits whom they worshipped and tried to appease. Taoism emphasized the path, which focused on harmony with nature. And because Taoism tended to question tradition and reject hierarchy, charismatic Taoist teachers led a number of popular uprisings in the last decades of the Han Dynasty. Buddhism was introduced in China in the 1st century CE, probably spread by merchants on the Silk Road. Because Buddhism called for monks to withdraw from families, it came into conflict with Confucian beliefs in family and procreation of children to maintain the cult of ancestors. This would lead to a gradual reshaping for acceptance in Chinese culture, and thus the birth of Neo-Confucianism. The spread of ideas in a deliberate and organized fashion that we can trace is a phenomenon of the 1st millennium CE. And this is particularly true in the cases of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, which we'll be studying throughout our discussion on trade. The spread of Buddhism was facilitated both by royal sponsorship and by travels of ordinary pilgrims and missionaries. In India, the Mauryan king Ashoka actively supported Buddhism, as did King Kanishka of the Kushans. One of the most well-known pilgrims who helped to transmit Buddhism to China was the Chinese monk Faxian, who left a very reliable narrative account of his journey. And Buddhist missionaries from India traveled to a variety of destinations, west to Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, as well as to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and Tibet. Buddhism was changed and further developed in the lands to which it spread. And this is where we see Theravada Buddhism, for example, and that would actually become the dominant form in Sri Lanka. So these are the Bodhisattvas, and these are two monumental Buddhist sculptures. They were near a mountain connecting Kabul, Afghanistan with the northern parts of the country. They date back to about the 6th or 7th century, but they were destroyed in March of 2001 by the Taliban because they were declared to be idols. So these are no longer there. As Christianity spread, we would also see it change. Armenia was an important destination for Silk Road trade. Mediterranean states spread Christianity to Armenia to bring that kingdom over to its side. And the goal was to deprive Iran of its control of trade in this area. The transmission of Christianity to Ethiopia also linked the Mediterranean regions to Christian kingdoms. The virtue of royal charters, as Western Europe would develop, would actually bring about the spread of Christianity as well, and in addition, continuing to bring in those markets. European cities offered their citizens freedom and social mobility. As Christianity would spread and as Western Europe came out of the Dark Ages after the Crusades, we're going to see a lot of persecution of European Jews. Jews lived in cities and they were subject to persecution everywhere but Rome. And they were blamed for disasters like the Black Death and expelled from Spain during Ferdinand and Isabella's Reconquista. We would see the rise of guilds. Guilds would regulate the practice of and then access to trades. And women typically weren't allowed to join guilds, but they worked in unskilled, non-guild jobs in the textile industry and then the food and beverage industry. The growth of commerce would also give rise to families like the Medicis of Florence and the Fujars of Augsburg. And we talked about them a little bit before. These families would handle financial transactions for merchants, the church, and kings and princes of France. And because the church prohibited the practice of making money off lending people in need money, we would see a lot of Christian Europeans unable to become bankers. So many money lenders and bankers actually were Jewish. Christian bankers got around this prohibition of making money off lending money by asking for gifts as a token of goodwill that you will repay this money back. There's always a loophole. You can always find a loophole. Despite these advances, many cities in Western Europe lacked basic facilities for ensuring public health and hygiene, as opposed to what cities in the Roman times or in their contemporary Islamic cities had in this medieval period. Remember, we talked about Alhambra. They had plumbing, y'all. Plumbing. It is extremely difficult and sometimes impossible to trace the spread of ideas in pre-literate societies. One example is eating pork. It was restricted or prohibited by religious belief in Southeast Asia, in ancient Egypt, and Eastern Iran. Because Southeast Asia was an early center of pig domestication, scholars hypothesized that pig and the religious injunctions concerning eating the pig traveled together towards the West. One theory is that you can't cook pig the same way that you can cook beef, for example. Beef, it's usually okay to eat it rare and delicious. Pig, not so much. It has to be cooked to a higher temperature. And you don't do this, you're going to get sick. And a lot of scholars believe this is where the idea came from, that pig was not an acceptable animal to eat as it made people ill. Another idea that we really can't trace is the invention of coins. In the Mediterranean world, coins were invented in Anatolia and spread from there to Europe, North Africa, and India. And the Chinese cast copper coins. And the question is this what inspired the coins in Anatolia or vice versa? There's no way to know. Speaking of money, along the Silk Road, the Song would see a period of an interregional credit system called flying money and government issued paper money, but it caused mass inflation and then was later withdrawn. The Song government could not control the market economy as closely as previous governments had done. And this is actually where we'll see the Silk Road taper off, and it really won't come back until the Yan dynasty and then the Ming dynasty, especially, really rise in power. Certain government functions, including tax collection, were privatized, and a new merchant elite thrived in cities, their wealth coming from trade rather than land, which in Confucian society put them at the bottom of the social scale. Thanks for listening, guys. Email me those questions.